Mirror Talk, Episode 11, Echo Chambers. Welcome back to Mirror Talk, the language of the nervous system. If you've journeyed with me through Layer 1, Foundational Awareness, you've already begun to see how we're inside us, how tone, silence, apology, and meaning each become forms of physiological code. That first layer was about learning to listen inward, to recognize that safety isn't just an emotional concept, but a bodily rhythm. Now, as we begin Layer 2, Relational Mirrors, the focus shifts from the language within to the language between, a space where nervous systems meet and reflect each other. This is where communication becomes choreography. Every dialogue is a duet of breath, tempo, and tone, a negotiation between our need to be known and our instinct to stay safe. In this new layer, we'll explore how we unconsciously mirror and modulate one another, how belonging can stabilize or distort us, and how dialogue, when conscious, becomes one of the most profound forms of co-regulation available to human beings. Because what we call connection is not only emotional or intellectual, it's biological. Our bodies are built to sync. The new layer, from regulation to resonance in Layer 1, we built the foundation. We discovered that every phrase carries a physiological fingerprint. Silence and safety are not abstract ideas, but nervous system states expressed through language. Now we expand that awareness outward. Layer 2, Relational Mirrors asks, what happens when my state meets yours? How do we stay regulated in disagreement? Can dialogue itself become a healing practice? Each episode in this new arc will explore one aspect of relational language: echo chambers, boundaries, belonging, conflict, projection, empathy, power, and repair, all through the lenses of NSL, nervous system language, and the mirror linguistic hypothesis, MLH. These tools remind us that language doesn't just describe reality, it designs it. Words alter heart rate, breath, and posture. Even digital dialogue without sound or sight can trigger physiological cascades, which is why today's topic, echo chambers, is not just about information, it's about regulation. Echo chambers, the sound of safety, the death of dialogue. The term echo chamber originally referred to a physical space, a room where sound bounced off the walls until it became distorted, repetitive, and hollow. The irony is that our modern conversations often behave the same way. We've created emotional acoustics that reward resonance and punish dissonance. Online and offline, we tend to gather where our thoughts are mirrored back to us, because sameness feels safe. Agreement releases dopamine. Contradiction triggers cortisol. The nervous system reads disagreement not as debate but as danger. This is where the problem begins. When safety depends on sameness, curiosity dies. And when curiosity dies, so does dialogue. But echo chambers aren't only digital. They exist in our relationships, workplace, sentences. The nervous system relaxes. It says, I am not alone, the echo is ancient. It's older than language, older than logic. It's the body's memory of being mirrored. Before we could name anything, we needed to be seen and heard. And if that mirroring didn't happen reliably in childhood, relationships, or community, we grow into adults who chase it everywhere, in partners, ideologies, or online tribes. That's why the comfort of familiar sound is so powerful. Agreement doesn't just affirm ideas, it stabilizes the body. The physiology of familiarity. When we encounter familiar tone, phrasing, or belief, a cascade of soothing chemistry occurs. The amygdala, our threat detector, quiets. The insular and anterior cingulate cortex, both responsible for social connection, light up. A trickle of dopamine reinforces the pleasure of belonging. If empathy is an evolutionary survival tool, agreement is its shortcut. Through the lens of nervous system language, NSL, we can see this as regulatory resonance. The body reads sameness as safety. Shared rhythm, tone, and pacing create a synchrony that mirrors secure attachment. It's the same dynamic between infant and caregiver, the cooed response, the matched tempo, the steady gaze that says, you exist, and you are safe here. But in adulthood, that physiological craving for resonance doesn't disappear. We seek it in belief systems, in media feeds, in conversational partners who get us. In a dysregulated world, echo becomes a self-soothing mechanism. The sound of sameness acts like a weighted blanket for the mind. This is why people can spend hours scrolling comment threads that simply reaffirm their worldview. It's not just intellectual laziness, it's emotional regulation. Predictability keeps the nervous system stable. In mirror linguistic hypothesis, MLH terms, the syntax of safety develops when we hear our thoughts repeated in external language. The mirrored phrasing tells the subconscious, your pattern is valid, continue. Thus, language becomes both signal and sedative. Echo as attachment loop. Think of an echo chamber not just as a metaphor for social media or ideology, but as a reenactment of attachment. When a caregiver mirrors a child's emotion, the child learns that expression leads to connection. When a caregiver fails to mirror, the child learns that safety lies in silence, or in saying only what keeps approval. Those early experiences become the architecture of adult communication. If mirroring was conditional, I'll listen when you behave, don't talk back, stop being dramatic, then we internalize safety as agreement. We grow to equate sameness with love. In every conversation thereafter, we unconsciously scan for matching tone. Disagreement doesn't just challenge our ideas, it reactivates attachment threat. The body registers it as a disconnection. Through NSL, we can map this somatically. Tension in the chest when someone disagrees, shallow breath when trying to defend a point, jaw clenching or throat tightening as the body prepares for rejection. The nervous system doesn't know the difference between you're wrong and you're unsafe. That's the hidden cost of echo-based safety. Do I listen for truth or for comfort? When someone challenges me, does my body hear danger or difference? Can I remain curious when resonance breaks? The next time you feel agreement soothe you, pause and ask, am I safe, or is this just familiar? The comfort of familiar sound is not a moral failing, it's a biological inheritance. But understanding that inheritance is the first step in transforming it. Because if the nervous system seeks sameness to stay safe, the mind must learn how to stay curious to stay free. Next, we'll explore the neuroscience of resonance itself, how the brain rewards agreement, why difference feels like a threat, and what it takes to build a nervous system that can breathe in complexity without breaking. Neural resonance, why the brain loves agreement, every brain hungers for pattern. When the world feels uncertain, repetition and recognition become oxygen. Agreement, whether intellectual, emotional, or ideological, soothes the nervous system because it promises safety. To be mirrored is to be metabolically calm. The comfort of consensus. At the most basic level, the brain's predictive coding machinery seeks to minimize surprise. Friston's free energy principle describes perception itself as a process of prediction and correction. We forecast what will happen next. When the world confirms that forecast, the nervous system relaxes. Agreement is therefore not just social comfort, it is neurological efficiency. From infancy, safety is paired with synchrony. A baby's heartbeat slows when its mother's voice repeats familiar tonal rhythms. Oxytocin rises when gaze and gesture align. These micro-regulations form the template for later cognitive and cultural echo chambers. We do not simply like those who agree with us. We physiologically stabilize through them. The mirror reflex mirror neurons, discovered in the premotor cortex of macaques in the 1990s, fire both when an action is performed and when it is observed. In humans, this network extends into emotional and linguistic domains. We simulate each other's tone, tension, and micro-expressions. Agreement, therefore, feels like internal harmony, not merely shared opinion. NSL, the nervous system language framework, views resonance as a bodily grammar. Tone, cadence, and rhythm form the syntax of safety. When another person's nervous system matches ours, conversation flows. Disagreement, by contrast, creates desynchronization. Heart rate variability decreases, cortisol rises, and our prefrontal capacity for empathy narrows. The mirror linguistic hypothesis, MLH, deepens this by showing that reflection is the medium through which meaning stabilizes. Each exchange is a feedback loop. Words become mirrors that signal I recognize your reality. When those mirrors fracture, the body registers rejection before the mind constructs an argument. Neural comfort and cognitive economy agreement is metabolically cheap. Dissonance demands energy. The anterior cingulate cortex, ACC, lights up when beliefs are challenged, a neural marker of conflict detection. To reduce this discomfort, the brain either adjusts the belief, cognitive reappraisal, or doubles down, confirmation bias. Festinger's 1957 theory of cognitive dissonance remains valid under modern neuroimaging. Incongruent information activates both, suggesting better emotional regulation when confronted with differences. In contrast, those in closed echo environments exhibited stronger amygdala activation and weaker prefrontal modulation. Simply put, curiosity keeps the brain calm, certainty keeps it clenched. From echo to resonance. The shift from echo to resonance marks the evolution of consciousness. Echo repeats, resonance responds. Echo confirms, resonance converses. In NSL terms, resonance requires reciprocal regulation, both nervous systems adjusting microsignals to maintain connection without collapse. In MLH, it requires reflective integrity, acknowledging that meaning exists between, not within, speakers. The practical bridge is embodied curiosity. When you feel the impulse to correct, slow down and translate the body's message. I am seeking safety. Ask instead, what truth might I be missing? This reframes disagreement as information rather than invasion. A step-by-step practice, retuning dialogue 1. Pause and notice. Sense your physiological state before replying. Are you leaning forward, clenching, and shallow breathing? That posture writes your next sentence before you think it. 2. Name the need, agreement, or understanding. Sometimes what the body wants is not consensus, but connection. 3. Soften the tempo, lower vocal speed, or in writing, add breath-like punctuation. Commas and line breaks can regulate tone digitally. 4. Reflect before reacting. Paraphrase what you heard. So you're saying, this engages the prefrontal cortex, lowering limbic reactivity. 5. Reevaluate safety. If regulation holds, continue. If not, pause. Silence can be the nervous system's reset. 6. Resume with resonance. Choose language that expands rather than contracts. I hadn't considered that. Tell me more. This process aligns with the three-brain model: reptilian, safety, limbic emotion, and neocortical reason. Agreement feels safe because it keeps the conversation at the neocortical level. Disagreement triggers the limbic. The task of mature dialogue is to maintain access to all three without letting any dominate. The neuroscience of reattunement research in interpersonal neurobiology, Siegel, 2012, shows that dyadic regulation, two individuals adjusting their states through eye contact, tone, and timing, increases vagal tone and resilience. Even imagined interaction, reading supportive text, recalling a kind phrase, can produce similar parasympathetic effects. This suggests that linguistic empathy can be trained. By practicing prosodic speech, warm tempo, variable pitch, and gentle inflection, individuals not only calm others but also themselves. MLH interprets this as mirror entrainment, reflection that generates regulation. Neuropsychologically, this practice strengthens the medial prefrontal cortex, enhancing perspective taking. In simple terms, listening changes the listener's brain more than speaking changes the speaker's. The anatomy of disagreement functional MRI reveals that during heated debate, the amygdala activates within milliseconds before the conscious mind formulates an argument. The insula track's visceral discomfort. The default mode network DMN lights up as the self defends narrative coherence. When participants engage in reflective listening instead of rebuttal, activity shifts to the anterior insular and dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, regions linked to empathy and cognitive flexibility. Agreement, therefore, is not the goal. Regulation is. The nervous system values calm curiosity over conquest. Cognitive repatterning through language. Each time you translate emotional reaction into descriptive language, you rewire the neural circuitry between the limbic system and the language centers, Broca's and Wernicke's areas. This affects the labeling process, confirmed by Lieberman et al. 2007, reduces amygdala activation and increases emotional granularity, the capacity to differentiate feelings rather than drown in them. In NSL practice, labeling sensations rather than judgments, I feel heat in my chest versus I'm angry bridges body and language. MLH expands it. Describing the mirror rather than the image, something in your tone feels sharp to me, invites reflection rather than accusation. Restoring polyphonic dialogue. Healthy societies depend on polyphony, many voices held in tension without collapse. The philosopher Bakhtin described truth as dialogic, born from interaction rather than isolation. Neuroscience confirms this. Diversity of thought maintains neural plasticity. Monologue, whether ideological or algorithmic, ossifies the brain's adaptability. To cultivate polyphony internally, practice counterspeech. Intentionally expose yourself to differing ideas while maintaining regulation. Notice the bodily impulse to reject, breathe, and reread. Over time, tolerance for complexity becomes embodied literacy. The ethics of listening is not passive. It is an act of nervous system generosity. To hold another's voice without immediate defense signals to their body that it can down-regulate. This is the physiological root of empathy, a co-created safety loop. From an MLH stance, listening extends mirror capacity. From NSL, it stabilizes biophysical coherence. Practically, it transforms discourse. Arguments cool not because points are conceded, but because bodies remember how to breathe together. Integration, the science of resonant awareness. When examined through these lenses, neuroscience, psychology, and linguistics, agreement appears less moral than metabolic. It is the body's shorthand for stability. The task is not to abandon resonance but to expand it, to tolerate difference without losing regulation. Practicing this rewires prediction networks, increasing the brain's tolerance for uncertainty. Dopamine release becomes linked to curiosity rather than certainty. That shift marks emotional maturity. The pleasure of learning replaces the relief of being right. MLH and NSL both converge on this principle. Language is a living mirror of the nervous system. The words we choose can contract the world or make it breathable again. Resonance begins in the body, but it no longer ends there. Every nervous system now has a digital twin, a trace of its tone, tempo, and tension living inside code. Our devices have learned to anticipate the rhythms of our emotions, predicting what we'll want to see before we. There is a fundamental difference in goal. The nervous system seeks survival through regulation. The algorithm seeks revenue through activation. The first wants balance, the second wants continuation. When these two systems couple, body and code, the human organism is slowly trained to equate stimulation with safety. Neuroscientist Jacques Panksepp's research on emotional circuits shows that the brain's seeking system releases dopamine not at satisfaction, but in anticipation. The algorithm exploits that same pre-reward tension, keeping the hand scrolling for the next hit of prediction error. Text as tone, speech as melody, so does writing. Even in silence, punctuation becomes prosody. When someone messages, "We need to talk," without an emoji, your amygdala and anterior cingulate cortex activate exactly as they would if a real voice had just lowered its pitch in warning. Studies by Shermer and Kotz, 2006, show that prosodic threat and textual threat share overlapping neural pathways. NSL calls this digital prosody the body's capacity to hear through text. Capitalization mimics shouting. Ellipses mimic withholding. Exclamation marks simulate reassurance. Even latency, the pause before someone replies, becomes semantic. The brain's insula, responsible for interoceptive awareness, registers waiting as a social threat. Cortisol rises, heart rate variability drops. In short, text is tone. Each word online carries not only cognitive meaning but somatic consequence. MLH screens as reflective mirrors. The mirror linguistic hypothesis suggests that meaning emerges through reflection. The self sees itself in the syntax of others. Online, those mirrors have multiplied and mechanized. Every interaction becomes feedback. You express, the algorithm amplifies, and then the body reacts and the system learns. It's an infinite loop of mimetic mirroring, reminiscent of René Girard's theory of mimetic desire. We learn what to want by watching what others respond to. Here, however, the other is a statistical model. The mirror is dazzling but depthless. Unlike human empathy, which regulates via micro-expressions and parasympathetic attunement, algorithmic reflection lacks the vagal synchrony that calms the nervous system. It recognizes patterns but cannot co-regulate them. In MLH terms, this is reflection without resonance, a linguistic echo that confirms but never corrects. Viral outrage and arousal contagion in 2018, a landmark MIT study found that false news spreads 6 times faster than the truth. Why? Because the brain's salience network, comprising the amygdala, insula, and anterior cingulate, is wired to prioritize emotional novelty over factual stability. When outrage spikes, so does noradrenaline. Attention locks in. The body interprets arousal as importance. Each share becomes a mini dose of dopamine, rewarding the act of moral signaling. Neuroscientist Lisa Feldman Barrett calls this process affective realism. We experience our emotional state as evidence about the world. Algorithms capitalize on this. They deliver content that maintains arousal, keeping affect alive so that attention doesn't drop. NSL names this pattern arousal contagion. Emotional tone spreads like rhythm. One nervous system's activation becomes the timeline's pulse. In mirror neuron terms, Rizzolatti and Craigero, 2004, observing emotion activates similar circuits as expressing it. Online, that loop is instantaneous and exponential. MLH reframes it linguistically. Semantic echo, repetition that replaces reflection. Outrage becomes grammar. Grammar becomes group identity. Synthetic empathy artificial intelligence interfaces now simulate empathy with chilling fluency. Generative models are trained on the linguistic forms of care. That must be difficult. I understand. Take your time. Yet neuropsychologically, this is recognition without resonance. There is no vagal tone, no micromuscular feedback, no oscillation between speaker and listener. When everyone around you nods, the nervous system exhales. Consensus feels calm, but calm is not always safety. Sometimes it is synchronized anxiety, disguised as peace. Human beings evolved to survive in groups, not to be right in isolation. Neuropsychology shows that belonging activates the same neural pathways as physical safety, particularly within the ventral striatum and anterior cingulate cortex. Agreement, therefore, isn't only social, it's somatic. The body rewards conformity with a chemical sigh of relief. But when agreement becomes architecture, when shared belief hardens into identity, something vital collapses. Curiosity flattens, language narrows, and the reflective capacity of the mind gives way to repetition. The echo chamber is not only a technological construct, it is a biological reflex dressed in cultural clothing, a brain's blueprint for belonging from a neurological perspective. Social homeostasis functions much like physiological homeostasis. The brain uses feedback from tone, facial expression, and group behavior to regulate internal states. When the group smiles, we mirror the expression, receive a small hit of oxytocin, and interpret it as trust. When the group frowns, we adjust our opinions or speech to re-enter synchrony. This phenomenon, social mimicry, is driven by the mirror neuron system, discovered by Rizzolatti and colleagues in the 1990s. These neurons fire both when performing an action and when observing another perform it. In conversation, they help us feel into someone else's emotion. In groups, they can create powerful cascades of agreement. From the perspective of NSL, this is nervous system resonance, tone, breath, and gaze aligning across multiple bodies. From the lens of MLH, it is linguistic entrainment, phrases, slogans, and metaphors replicating themselves through the group's shared syntax. Agreement, then, begins as empathy, but ends when unexamined as entrainment. The group shadow Carl Jung described the shadow as the part of the psyche we disown and project onto others. When individuals gather around shared virtue, they often create a collective shadow, a set of traits the group must deny to preserve its purity. In echo chambers, this shadow is externalized as them. The psychological mechanism is simple. Unity requires contrast. To feel righteous, we must imagine a wrong. Neuroscience shows that moral outrage activates reward pathways similar to those engaged by food or music. Crockett et al. 2017. Every post, comment, or affirmation of tribal loyalty provides a small dopaminergic surge. The brain's reward prediction error mechanism, which signals unexpected pleasure, lights up when our indignation is validated. Thus, agreement feels good not only emotionally, but chemically. It is the neural signature of belonging through opposition. MLH reframes this linguistically. The group speaks to itself through the grammar of difference. We only exist in tension with they. Haidt's moral foundations. Psychologist Jonathan Haidt's moral foundations theory offers further insight. He argues that human morality is built upon 6 universal pillars: care, fairness, loyalty, authority, sanctity, and liberty. Different groups emphasize different pillars, and most moral disagreements arise not from opposing values, but from conflicting priorities. True dialogue begins not with sameness, but with safety and difference. Polyvagal informed communication offers a pathway. The ventral vagal state, characterized by open gaze, soft tone, and rhythmic breath, allows the nervous system to stay anchored even amidst conflict. When both speakers maintain ventral engagement, disagreement becomes exploration, not threat. Practically, this means regulating before replying. Slowing breath lowers sympathetic charge. Naming emotion re-engages the prefrontal cortex. Curiosity phrases, help me understand, reframe opposition as co-investigation. In NSL, this is linguistic de-escalation, the use of rhythm and tone to signal openness. In MLH, it's semantic reframing, reinterpreting disagreement as mutual translation rather than opposition. When safety is restored, the mirror becomes a window again. Reflection prompt, am I mirroring authenticity or performance? Ask not from guilt but curiosity. Notice how your body shifts when you say something you believe versus something you say to belong. The genuine phrase expands the lungs, the performative one contracts the throat. This micro-awareness is where liberation begins, when you can feel the difference between being agreed with and being understood. Understanding the architecture of agreement gives us the map, but repair requires movement. Insight without embodiment is architecture without foundation. In Element 5, the disagreement map, we'll transform these insights into action, a 3-step practice to locate emotional rupture, translate tension into clarity, and integrate safety back into dialogue. There, language becomes not a wall of defense, but a bridge of return. The disagreement map, locating, translating, integrating disagreement isn't dysfunction. It's friction, and friction is what allows transformation. Without it, dialogue collapses into repetition, and relationships calcify into ritual. The friction that forms meaning. But the modern nervous system, hyper-connected, hyper-vigilant, algorithmically primed, treats disagreement like danger. The amygdala, scanning constantly for threat, doesn't distinguish between a raised voice and a raised eyebrow, between disapproval and danger. To the limbic brain, all are sparks of the same fire. That's why staying calm during conflict feels impossible, because the body isn't lying. It's alarmed. The goal, then, isn't to override that alarm with logic or spiritual platitudes, but to translate it. To learn the geography of disagreement, the topography of tension, and navigate it with conscious rhythm. This is the disagreement map, a framework that moves from reflex to reflection, from activation to articulation. Step 1. Locate where the rupture lives. The first act of repair is orientation. Before you can rebuild a bridge, you have to know where it broke. In NSL, location means identifying where conflict manifests in the body. For some, it's a tightening in the throat, speech inhibition. For others, it's a heavy chest, grief or guilt, or clenched fists fight response. Neuropsychologically, this is interoception, the brain's ability. Let's examine the microstructure of repair language through NSL and MLH lenses. 1. NSL principle. Breath before word regulation precedes revelation. Speak on the exhale to lower sympathetic charge. Use rhythmic phrasing, I hear you, I want to understand, to signal safety. End sentences softly, avoid abrupt tonal stops that mimic threat. 2. MLH principle. Reframe the mirror. When mirroring defensiveness, gently pivot the reflection. If someone says, you don't get it, respond, help me see it from your side. Shift from confrontation, why, to curiosity, how. For NS plus MLH integration, combine rhythm with reflection. Your physiology and language co-create the environment. Together, they form what neuroscientist Stephen Porges might call neuroception of safety, the felt sense that it's safe to stay open. Journaling practice, your personal disagreement map. Take a recent argument, it could be with a partner, a friend, or even a comment thread online. Locate what happened in your body. Which sensations warned you first? Did you feel heat, anger, tightness, fear, or numbness freeze? 2. Translate, what story did your mind attach to that sensation? How did you express it, directly, defensively, or silently? 3. Integrate, what could you have said that included both your truth and your regulation? Write one bridging phrase using your ventral voice, soft, steady, specific. Finish with this reflection prompt. What happens to my breath when I meet opposition? Write down what you notice, not as judgment, but as data. Your nervous system is a living language lab, the mirror neural repair loop. When two people navigate disagreement with awareness, they create a loop of mutual neural repair. Research in social baseline theory, conspire, 2015, suggests that simply perceiving another person as supportive reduces the metabolic cost of emotional regulation. In other words, connection conserves energy. This is why repaired relationships feel grounding. They literally lighten the body's regulatory load. The disagreement map functions as a mirror neural exercise. Locating restores interoception. Translating activates verbal integration. Integrating re-establishes co-regulation. The brain learns, through repetition, that difference does not equal danger, that curiosity can coexist with conviction. The neuropsychology of apology, a word about repair. Apologies, when authentic, activate the ventromedial prefrontal cortex, associated with empathy and moral reasoning. But performative apologies, those offered to restore image rather than safety, fail to trigger this circuit. They soothe only the ego, not the organism. NSL reframes apology as vagal offering, a signal of safety that downshifts both bodies. MLH sees it as semantic recalibration, rewriting the meaning where misalignment occurred. When you say, "I'm sorry for the way I spoke," rather than "I'm sorry if you were hurt," you recenter the mirror on your reflection, not theirs. That precision reactivates trust. True repair is physiological truth-telling. Repair without resolution integration doesn't always mean agreement. Sometimes the highest harmony is respectful dissonance. Neuroscientifically, that's the marker of a regulated system, the ability to tolerate complexity without collapse. It's called emotional granularity, the capacity to differentiate subtle feelings rather than lumping them into good or bad. In NSL terms, granularity is linguistic precision. In MLH, it's mirror clarity. The more specific the word, the calmer the body. When two people can end a conversation saying, "We still see it differently, but I feel safe with you," the nervous system registers completion, even without consensus. This is how dialogue evolves from debate into communion. Integrating disagreement across cultures. Our capacity for safe disagreement also depends on collective language patterns. Cultures with high context communication, Japan, Finland, rely on subtle cues and pauses. Low context cultures, US, UK, prioritize explicit verbal exchange. From a polyvagal lens, high context cultures cultivate vagal toning through silence. From MLH, their metaphors encode harmony rather than hierarchy. Cross-cultural integration teaches us that disagreement can sound like stillness or song, that peace doesn't require uniformity, only rhythm. In a global nervous system, this understanding becomes essential. To translate not just between languages, but between states. Reflection, the breath between words. When I slow my breath, my meaning changes. That's the essence of integration. The word follows the wave. Each pause rewires the pattern. Each exhale redefines what power feels like. Because in the end, disagreement isn't a failure of communication. It's the birthplace of consciousness. To disagree safely is to evolve collectively. Mapping disagreement teaches us the internal cartography of conflict. But resonance, the rhythm that keeps conversation alive, is what sustains connection beyond repair. In the next element, embodied resonance, relearning conversational rhythm, will move from map to movement, from the cognitive to the kinetic, from the theory of coherence to the dance of dialogue. There, we rediscover that language at its core is breath made visible, and that the future of empathy lives in how we pace our words. Embodied resonance, relearning conversational rhythm. Every conversation has a pulse, a rhythm woven from pauses, breaths, blinks, and tone. When you're fully attuned to someone, that rhythm synchronizes two nervous systems moving in gentle oscillation. It's not something we consciously plan, it's a biological duet, the lost tempo. But in the modern era of rapid speech, instant messaging, and algorithmic reaction, that rhythm has accelerated beyond the body's natural pacing. We don't talk, we discharge. We don't listen, we prepare to respond. The result is a new kind of social arrhythmia, a dysregulated tempo where listening feels like loss and silence feels like failure. To relearn conversational rhythm is to reawaken the ancient body time of dialogue, where words follow breath rather than adrenaline. Tempo therapy. Resetting the nervous system's metronome. Tempo therapy is not a formal treatment, but a metaphor drawn from NSL, nervous system language, the idea that every word carries physiological rhythm. Each syllable you utter has a neural cost. The brain must coordinate respiration, vocalization, and cognitive sequencing. When speech accelerates, this system shifts towards sympathetic activation, prioritizing speed over coherence. You can hear this in tense dialogue, clipped phrasing, overlapping sentences, and sharp endings. These are not linguistic quirks. They are stress signatures. Tempo therapy reverses the pattern by restoring vagal pacing, the natural rhythm governed by the vagus nerve that allows social engagement. Try this. Inhale gently through the nose for 4 counts. Speak one phrase per exhale. End on a downward tone. This communicates Short inhale, long exhale, safety and grounding. That final rhythm, long exhalation, activates parasympathetic dominance, restoring heart rate variability and reducing cortisol. It literally builds the biological foundation for empathy. So when you slow your breath mid-argument, you're not being passive, you're becoming architectural. You're building the bridge that allows both bodies to stay connected long enough to hear again. MLH, mutual mirroring. Language as resonance. From the mirror linguistic hypothesis MLH perspective, conversation is a reflective choreography. Each phrase offered becomes a mirror, each response a refracted beam of meaning. When resonance occurs, when tone and intention align, something extraordinary happens: semantic synchrony. Neuroscientist Yuri Hassan's studies on conversational coupling found that during attuned dialogue, the speaker's and listener's brain activity align in the temporal and frontal regions. Understanding isn't just conceptual, it's rhythmic. MLH interprets this as meaning in motion, not stored in words, but pulsing through the rhythm of exchange. When this rhythm breaks, through interruption, defensiveness, or distraction, the mirror fractures. The echo returns. To restore resonance, we don't need agreement, we need alignment of tempo. Once rhythm synchronizes, comprehension follows naturally. Dialogue as a nervous system dance. Imagine a conversation as a slow, evolving dance. Two bodies moving between approach and retreat, curiosity and containment. This isn't metaphorical, it's neurological. Interpersonal synchrony, observed in neuropsychological studies, shows that rhythmic attunement in speech, gesture, or movement increases oxytocin and insular coherence, markers of empathy and trust. When rhythm is broken, communication shifts from ventral, connected, to sympathetic, defensive. The conversation begins to feel like a fight rather than a flow. The antidote is rhythm restoration. Not fixing content, but recovering pulse. You can begin this even mid-conflict. 1. Drop your shoulders. 2. Slow your voice tempo by half. 3. Listen not to the words, but to the music of the other person's tone. This activates mirror neurons and restores what NSL calls co-regulatory cadence, the synchronization of physiological rhythm through linguistic pacing. Dialogue becomes a dance of nervous systems, not a duel of egos. Hearing with the whole body. Listening is not a passive act. It's neurochemical choreography. True listening engages the superior temporal gyrus, language decoding, the anterior insular, empathic resonance, and the orbitofrontal cortex, emotional evaluation. Together, these regions form what some neuroscientists call the social brain. When we listen only with the intellect, we fragment this network. The body must be included. To hear with the whole body means softening the jaw and diaphragm, signals of receptivity. Keeping peripheral vision open reduces amygdala vigilance. Matching the other's breathing rhythm, entrainment. Through this, you cultivate what MLH calls embodied comprehension, understanding that arrives through resonance rather than reasoning. The rhythm of repair. Every repaired relationship passes through 3 rhythmic phases. 1. Asynchrony, disconnection, noise, rupture. 2. Resonance, the nervous systems align, mutual rhythm returns. 3. Integration, new pattern emerges. Dialogue becomes creative again. This mirrors the brain's own oscillatory repair cycles, moving from chaotic beta alertness into coherent alpha integration. When people find their rhythm after conflict, they are literally moving from cognitive fragmentation to neural coherence. In NS awareness, because to speak consciously is not to avoid conflict, it's to move through it without losing coherence. Thank you for returning, for listening, for noticing. Until next time, speak as if silence were sacred and listen as if the world depends on it, because it does. You've been listening to Mirror Talk, the language of the nervous system. I'm James Miller.